ready to get started with the
testing.
With the March 14th meeting of the Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District.
Everyone.
Okay, we're not inviting anybody again after this, so. Thank you all for coming. We're going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance, if we could. There we go.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great. So I will call the meeting to order, and we're certainly pleased to have a lot of people here tonight. We're looking forward to a lot of input and a lot of discussion. We're going to start, though, with public comment. If anyone wishes to address the Board of Managers on an item not on the agenda or on the consent agenda, please come forward at this time, turn on the microphone, and state your name and address. We may limit your time for commenting for conciseness. So is there anyone that has business before the board that is not on the agenda? One more time, is there anybody here that would like to address the board before we get started with our regular agenda? Hearing none, we're going to get started. And Maggie, I think we're going to start with you with the Farmer-Led Council presentation.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, we need to approve the agenda.
I'm sorry, yes, please.
And I have a change. If we could take the SWCD service agreement 4.10 up under the Farmer-Led Council near the top. So that would become 4.2 and the numbers go consecutively down the line.
That is a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Manager Hennis. Any other discussion? All in favor of approving the agenda as corrected?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, Manager Bredbach. Maggie.
Mr. Chair and managers, we are very pleased today that our Farmer-Led Council members have come to speak to you guys. They'll be presenting on a little bit of background on what the Farmer-Led Council is, what it has done, and our goals for the future. And so 3 of our Farmer-Led Council members are here, and they have been very active since the very beginning, so we're very pleased that they're here. We have Paul Kruger, Rob Casey, and Joe Henches. And so if you guys want to come up.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity to make this presentation to you today. The council was started in March of 2013. It was kind of a brainchild of Mike Kinney, who was the manager at that time. And he came up with the idea. He came to me and says, "Do you think this could work? Are you interested in cooperating with this?" And I said, "Let's give it a shot." So we did. The purposes of the Farmer-Led Council was to improve public understanding of the farming operations, to proactively address water quality concerns, and to help develop win-win programs and locally networking and education opportunities. I think the easiest way to sum this up is to say that the most efficient way for you guys to keep the lake clean and to clean up the lake is to keep phosphorus out of the lake. And we don't want our phosphorus in the lake any more than you guys do. We pay good money for phosphorus. It's a nutrient that we need to raise the crop. If the phosphorus is in the lake, it doesn't do us any good. So we're on the same page, and it makes it a whole lot easier that way. But keeping the phosphorus on the ground, and we certainly appreciate your efforts in giving us some support in coming up with some different ways of getting that done. I'll let Rob, I think, or Joe.
One of the first things that we did when we kind of got together as a Farmer-Led Council was establishing goals. how can we project ourselves? What do we want to do? You know, and from early on leadership was to, as Paul said, let's get the phosphorus out of the lake. You know, we monitored tile lines, did a lot of monitoring and stuff to get an idea where this is coming from. Some of our goals were increasing meeting attendance, participating farmers, and trying to get more acreage into these programs that we're brainstorming up. Initiating and promoting the lake-friendly farms. I think that's going to be a really good public image. And organizing annual meetings. We're going to investigate alternate crops and buffers for cover crops. And we're going to help identify and facilitate win-win options for upstream storage areas. We all work together pretty well, kind of getting these goals together, and I think these goals all come together to help solve our problems. Rob?
Here are some of the accomplishments in 2015 and 2016 cost share opportunities. The cover crops, now it's a soil and water conservation district cost share program. The variable rate application, now is a soil and water conservation district cost share. The water quality inlets, the flood study that we have done is input on farmers' damage during the flood, provided feedback, ideas on upstream storage, helped promote farmer listening sessions. Feedback to the district on projects and programs. Some farmer-led council programs have now become soil and water conservation district cost share programs. Advise on water quality monitoring program. Help identify problems and possible solutions. Under the farm assessment programs is the Ag Certainty Program, and then the locals, the Lake Friendly Farm Program.
Some of the programs that we have established for 2017 is a cover crop reverse auction, and that's very similar to the CRP. When you want to enroll in CRP, you take a bid to the county office, and they will accept bids depending upon how much good it's going to come from it. And we would do the same thing with the cover crops. If the cover crops are on a highly erodible field, they're going to get a higher score than they would if they're on a flat field farther away from the lake. We just decided that it's very difficult to, you can put a dollar value. Let's say we put $20 or $50 an acre. In some places it would probably be worth that, in other places it wouldn't. But we thought this was the most, and it may cost a lot of money to get somebody to try it the first time. But we'll do that and see what happens. After they have some experience with it, they may be willing to do it for less. So applications are now available and bids are due by the 25th. We have a couple of free products available. One is the alum treated biologs, and they would be, it's similar to a biolog that you would use in a construction site, and it's put around the tile inlet so that the water has to filter through that biolog in order to get to the tile outlet or tile inlet. Water quality inlets, I don't know, do we have an example of that? Actually, it's just a, okay. The actually goes on, sits on the top of the tile inlet. So it limits the amount of water that can go in, and it slows down, and it considerably decreases the amount of phosphorus that's going into that above ground outlet. And then we have free interseeder rental for the cover crops. SWCD last year purchased an interseeder that you can interseed cover crops into an existing standing cornfield. And they will, anybody that wants to use it can use it for free. That would probably be part of the bid for the cover crop if they were going to do that. And the lake-friendly farm program, we're in the process of establishing the criteria that we would have to be considered a lake-friendly farm. We're kind of fighting with that a little bit, trying to figure out, you want to make it possible that you can get to be a lake-friendly farm, but you also want some incentive that not everybody's going to get a sign if they don't do something to keep the phosphorus out of the lake. So who's next? Me. Cover crop share cost. I hold a license for certified crop advisor, and I attend a fair amount of meetings, agronomy meetings. As a result of that, I need to take 20 hours of continuing education. And some of the challenges with the cover crop is it's kind of in the experimental stage in Minnesota. We're just a little bit too far north for it to be extremely effective. If you get into southern Illinois, Indiana, and southern Iowa, they have more growing season left after they harvest their crop that they can get a cover crop established in the fall. It's much more difficult for us to do that, and that's why we're experimenting with the interseeding. On our dairy farm, we have the opportunity to put it in after we take the silage corn off, which is probably at least a month earlier than the corn for grain and the soybeans. So we have the opportunity to get that crop established in the fall. And what we've been doing is, instead of just terminating the crop in the spring, we harvest it for forage. And it's been extremely successful. We've done it, we've harvested 2 springs. This will be the 3rd spring that we will be doing that. When they bring up cover crops at these agronomy meetings, the first question that the farmer asks is it economically feasible for me to do that? I can't do it if it's going to cost me money to do it. And that's kind of the incentive that we have put with the reverse auction. Try it and see what it's going to, you know, we don't expect the farmer to have to cost him a lot of money to try it. And we appreciate your cooperation in being able to subsidize that to find out if it's going to work or not. It may be that over the long period of time, it will be economically feasible to do it without any incentives. It may not. And if that's the case and it's going to take $50 an acre, you guys as a board are going to have to decide whether or not it's feasible to continue to subsidize it. The other thing is we are able to harvest that in the spring of the year, but you have to harvest it as a high moisture forage. It's not possible to get it dry enough to just bale it dry. So the corn and soybean farmers don't have that option because they don't have that equipment to do it. So what does the incentive do? It minimizes the risk for the farmer. It gives the farmer the opportunity to gain the confidence of the cover crops and builds motivation for in the watershed. In other words, we did it for the last 3 years, and there's anybody else that has cattle in the watershed is probably going to give it a try. So.
One of the programs that we're doing is the variable rate application cost share. The variable rate application, you're able to put the fertilizer where it's needed and not where it isn't. A lot of the old traditional farming back years ago was just, well, you need to put this many pounds of potash, this many pounds of phosphorus, and you straight spread it. Well, certain areas of the field, aren't going to yield as much as other areas, and those weaker areas are going to get overloaded. Well, then when we have some of these rains like we had these past years, it can erode away. Well, when your dirt doesn't stay on your farm, your dirt's carrying phosphorus, and it's going to end up in our lakes. So with this variable rate application cost share, this is an incentive for more farmers to get on board with doing grid sample soil testing, and then following that up with U of M recommendations and a variable rate application map and a variable rate application. I have experience with this. I do my own soil testing, 2.5 acre grids. Take lots of samples around, all goes in a little baggie and gets sent off to a lab. I get that back as a, I guess, nutrient test reading, and then you got a computer program that gives you recommendations based off a yield goal. And then I get a pretty map that Scott Schneider gets to look at, and you can just see, it's like, this is where it's gonna go, put high, here it doesn't get anything. You know, and the monitor in the machine will turn it on and shut it off and speed it up, slow it down, does all that cool stuff. But at any rate, there's a lot of farmers that are in our watershed that aren't using this. And I think they would see a good value if they would just try. So to get them on board with this, that's one of our programs. Some of our next steps, we're going to try to get this, as Paul was talking, the cover crop reverse auction. We want to get that promoted. Let's get our mailers out. Let's get it in. Let's try it. I think that's going to be a really neat deal. I think we can look at this and it's, hey, here you got a steep hillside facing a stream that's leading in. Well, yeah, I think you're only talking 3 acres, but yeah, that's worth every penny of it, you know. We're going to get these tile inlets. We're going to get those installed and promoted. I got a couple of those that I'm going to put in here in the next week or two. And we're going to initiate the Lake Friendly Farm program. I think we're all pretty much on board for signing our own farms up and being the guinea pigs on it. And our next meeting is in July.
So the Farmer-Led Council would like to thank Bear Lake Spring Lake Water District Board for the efforts here and what we've accomplished. And it's been successful so far. And we thank you for the funding, support, and I guess if there's any questions.
Well, thank you to all three of you, and the thanks really goes to all of you. Not always is the money easy to find, but getting people engaged in these programs is really the most important thing. And all of you have put a lot of effort into this since 2013, and the results are really becoming apparent. We can see it, more and more excitement about it, more and more engagement in it, and I think it's all due to the folks that got involved in 2013, and certainly, at my understanding, you were the leaders, and hopefully there'll be some followers to follow you along. This input, we invite you to come back to these meetings, or certainly get in touch with any of us if there's some things you think need to be tweaked. I am interested, I guess, in the variable rate application cost share, just in the state or in the farm industry. How old is that technology? I guess I'm surprised that it isn't more, hasn't been more adopted in this county at this point.
Sure. I would say it probably first kind of was making its appearance with some of your co-ops, probably what, the mid-90s, early 90s, something like that.
Yeah.
I know the machine I've got, it's Windows Vista, so how far back is that? When the monitor powers up. I would say probably the mid-90s is when it kind of first started making its appearance.
So as people are replacing equipment and adding equipment, it's
right,
just part of the cycle.
It's your newer technology, and I mean your younger and some of your more innovative farmers and guys that want to stay on it, you know, a lot of your larger farmers too, you know, they can already see the value in it. Yep. And that's where it's getting the most bang for your buck for your fertilizer.
Sure, absolutely.
You know, I mean, I kind of look at the fertilizer, like if that's something I'm going to spend millions and millions of dollars on over the rest of my life,
Right. Yep.
I want to know a lot about it, and I want to make sure I get the most out of it.
Yeah.
I don't want to donate it to Spring Lake.
Terrific. Thank you. Manager Hennis.
Mr. President, I don't think we did introductions quickly. From left to right, the farmers are Joe Henches, Rob Casey, and Paul Kruger. They all farm in either Spring, Lake Township, or Sand Creek Township, or a combination of both. I think we should also acknowledge the people out in the audience. The gentleman in the front row is Mr. Steve McComas. He's from Blue Water Science. He does a lot of our vegetative analyses and recommendations. We have the full board for the Scott Soil and Water Conservation District. That's Mr. Gary Hartman, Doug Schineker, Linda Brown, Jim Fitzsimmons, and the director, the manager, Troy Kufla. We have 2 of 3 members from the Spring Lake Township Board, Doug Behrens and Ted Kowalski. Glenn Kelly, and I didn't tell you this, Mr. President, I apologize, called this morning. He's still out on the East Coast, trapped by weather, so he couldn't make it back here.
Get home?
Yes, and we also have our liaison from the City Council, Annette Thompson. Thank you all for coming here, and then we can carry on with more questions.
Great. Any other comments from the board or any other comments from the audience? Again, we appreciate your all being here tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, first, thank you. Number 1 on the agenda, not by accident. I think we really appreciate you being here and doing this, so kudos to the staff for putting them right up on top. In your goals, you talk about meeting attendance and increasing that. How many meetings do you have? Once a year, twice a year, once a month?
I think 4 a year, right? January, March, July, and November or December? September, okay.
Okay, and then how do you communicate with the farming community? You know, not being in there, is it just word of mouth? Is it, I think you mentioned mailings. Is there like an email, Facebook club or something, or how does it work?
First of all, we need to give a special thank you to Maggie. Maggie is very involved from the Soil and Water Conservation Administration and has been doing an excellent job of helping us with this. We wouldn't be to this point if she wasn't helping us in a great way, and I certainly appreciate all of her efforts. So she does a lot of mailings, and of course, word of mouth is probably the best way to do it. And when we see another farmer and we encourage them and they see what we're doing, that goes a long ways. That's probably the most effective way of getting the word out. And it's a pretty small group. I think Maggie said, we had 54 on the mailing list. So it's a fairly small group, and we probably know a majority of them personally.
I'm sorry, Paul, 54
Farmers or
54 producers,
landowners?
Yeah. And is that both producers and landowners?
So that's the mailing that we came up with. So we took parcels that were larger than 10 acres in size, and we kind of made a list of all the people who we thought were farmers or owners. And then the Farmer-Led Council refined that some more, as well as the SWCD. And that's a pretty solid list of 54 farmers in our upper watershed.
Mr. President, so have you found, between the 3 of you, do you know most of these 54? What kind of communication have you had with them? Have they been receptive? And what do you foresee in terms of cooperation going forward from these folks?
You guys want to comment?
Is that enough to ask?
I think, I'm in seed sales, so there's a good group of farmers that I'm in communication with multiple times a year. And Paul is also very active in just the farming community in general. I know another thing that we're looking at doing is putting some of our mailers up on the local co-ops kind of board, because put your stuff in front of where they're going. Everybody's going to their co-op for fertilizer and chemical and stuff like that. So, and what better way to help promote some of these fertilizer programs than to let your fertilizer retailer say, hey, you know, you can pay me to do your variable rate application, and then you can get this program kickback. So, was there more to your question, Kurt? I'm sorry.
I guess when I'm driving at is what you foresee the chances are of some real progress in terms of moving forward on this. I'm also concerned about if farmers have a trust in our organization, if they're willing to buy in, if they're still very skeptical, if they're non-communicative. How do you see that, those issues?
On those issues, I'd say there are some programs that are going to be more appealing than others. I think it's going to be, I can see a lot of potential coming out of the variable rate program, because I mean, I can see where farmers are going to see the value. A lot of the guys that I talk to are going to see the value. On the cover crop side, I think that might be a little bit slower, especially with crop prices where it is. But if there's enough incentive on it, that still raises an eyebrow. So, you know, I think time is going to tell with cover crops. I think we're already seeing some increases in our meetings. You know, we had a few more attendees, and I think we'll continue to grow that with interest with our other programs.
I mean, two of the big issues are nutrient runoff and eroded soil runoff. And I know the eroded soil runoff is a row crop issue. And I don't know, do you folks don't see cover crops ever approaching the price of row crops?
Well, the University of Minnesota is actually investigating and working, experimenting with pennycrest, which was a weed, but the definition of a weed is a plant that's growing where it's not supposed to be. So a corn plant in a soybean field is a weed. But anyway, it is also a seed-producing plant, and so what they're working on is planting that in the fall of the year, harvesting it in May, and then planting soybeans after it. And they have found that with harvesting those two crops, they can get more oil production per acre than you can just harvesting soybeans. And then you would have a crop that would be overwintered, that you would have a cover crop over the winter season as well. Needs a lot more. They're working on increasing the yield of that pennycrest. I think there is now a processing plant in Minnesota that they can process the pennycrest. I mean, it doesn't do any good to have the product if there's no place to process it and no place to sell it. So that's, you know, that's one of the things. As far as how soon this is going to catch on and what we're doing and how, it's not going to happen overnight. I mean, it takes time. Some people are going to be more receptive to it than others. Some people will not change. But there's less of them out because the economics of agriculture has weeded most of the poor farmers out. There isn't a whole lot of them left. The other comment that I would make is when you're talking about having rapport with these farmers, when you're working with SWCD, you're on the right page. Those guys have, for years, I was with them for 17 years and retired a few years ago as a supervisor. They have excellent, great rapport with these farmers. That's the best option that you have available to you, to cooperate with them and let them do the footwork for you.
I have two more quick questions, Mr. President. I apologize. Joe, I know you're a seed salesman. What kind of hybrids are out there now that would allow farmers to plant in May and yet be able to do a profitable harvest in, let's say, late November if the trend is continuing for climate change causing later falls?
Well, there's plenty of hybrids out there that can allow that in corn. And, I mean, beans are always going to be ready in October.
Do you get the same yield from those hybrids that are planted in May or late May versus mid or early April?
You can get pretty good yields. I mean, the problem is if you miss, if sometimes when Mother Nature gives you a window the second half of April and you don't take that, and then May turns wet. Well, are we talking the first week of May, the second week of May? There's nothing wrong with planting corn, full season corn, the first week of May. But if you're talking the third or fourth week of May, you're losing yield. You start talking June, you're losing a lot of yield. There are some earlier varieties that can still pull their weight. But your general mentality in our farming community is you need full season corn. I know that's what I see with a lot of my guys. I have a few customers that I'll sell an earlier variety corn because they don't have a corn dryer and stuff, and they're able to maintain a pretty substantial yield out of it. But most guys give me 100-day, 102-day corn.
Mr. President, my last quick question is, what do you folks foresee with the perhaps more legislation coming from the state in terms of kind of trying to push you towards more conservation practices? What do you hear from your fellow farmers? Do they realize what might be coming possibly down the road? Are they receptive to it? Do you find, what kind of environment do you hear from on that?
Well, I'm an advocate of staying ahead of the game and volunteering to try and make things work as opposed to regulations. Regulations are very, very difficult because it doesn't fit everybody. And you make a regulation that may work for somebody, but it doesn't work for the rest of them. So the more that we can do to stay up on top of it, that we can avoid the regulations, it's in everybody's best interest to do that. And, you know, there's some political connections with that. We may, in the next 4 years, we may see a few less regulations than we have in the past.
Well, and speaking for the whole board, I think that's the approach we would like to take. We would rather not regulate, and we really do see a great future for this farmer-led council to help us make sure that we're putting the right incentives in the right places and helping you to just get that word out as much as we can. So thank you again for all your efforts, and thank you for being here tonight. We'll share this information with as many people as we can.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, Troy, I think, nope, Diane is going to introduce.
Yes, Mr. Chair, managers, we are considering our annual agreement with the Soil and Water Conservation District. And let me take a moment to express to the audience what that means. The Soil and Water Conservation District has been working with our Watershed District for many years, and they are really an extension of staff. We are really dependent upon them for their expertise, as well as their assistance in a variety of other types of projects. So what we're looking at for the agreement for the the Soil and Water Conservation District this year is that we are continuing on with our technical services. We're expanding our farmer-led council services, which you just heard about. We are expanding our assistance with them for monitoring and data collection. And we are reducing our work with them on education services. So our budget in 2016 was $99,300, and in 2017 our budget is $128,800. So what we're asking for is the board to support the agreement for 2017.
So I believe we are on page 45. Is that correct? So we are looking for a motion to approve the agreement with the Scott Soil and Water Conservation District. Is there a motion?
I make a motion that we vote, that we accept the agreement with the SWCD on behalf of the Watershed District. We talked about this at our workshop, and we've talked about it before, and they've been great partners. Anyway, so that's my motion. To accept the agreement between the Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed and the Scotts Soil and Water Conservation District.
So moved by Manager Breitbach, seconded by Manager Hennis. Is there any other discussion? Questions? Any other discussion?
If I just may say, Mr. President, yeah, we kind of heard a ringing endorsement earlier from the farmer-led council. So, yes, I'll be supporting the agreement.
Yeah, I think you have some expectations out there, so we're looking forward to this. So all in favor of the motion, vote yes?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Thank you. We're looking forward to working with you this year.
Thank you, folks, for coming. It's great to see all of you here.
Okay, if my amended agenda is still correct, I think we're moving on to Steve McComas and lake vegetation presentation. Welcome, Steve, as always.
Thank you very much. Boom. Okay, got it. Thanks. Well, we're looking out. We had open water for a while. It froze back up, but I suspect it's on its way. Anyway, Control Alt Delete, and then I can set this up. And I'll do this. In the meantime, the curlyleaf is probably growing right now. It's one of the things we're talking about, and it's growing under the ice, and as soon as the ice comes off, we get better sunlight, and that's one of the things that's right up here first on the agenda, or on this PowerPoint. So what we have is Spring Lake and Prior Lake have been typically the lakes we've been looking at for early season curlyleaf, where we go and delineate areas that could be treated first, then treat or don't treat, and then go back and assess both the areas that were treated and also other areas to see if we missed anything, to see if in fact we didn't delineate the proper areas, and also to check to see if the herbicide applicator was able to get good control. One of the challenges is that early season curlyleaf looks like this. It has single stems, and it generally has light growth, and we get to predict based on those conditions where it's going to grow to be heavy growth and where it's going to grow to be light growth. And typically what we're looking at is number of stems per rake sweep, and that has been pretty successful. So here's early season, single stems. This is what we see in April, and by June, the plant will put out these runners and you'll get multiple stems, and you can get potentially real heavy growth. But we're predicting in April, and we can tell if generally in early April the plant's just starting to put out some runners. So that's how we check and see if the potential is there for future heavy growth. We don't want to see the situation, the condition, the heavy growth condition that's shown there at the bottom of that chart. But if we suspect it's going to be light growth, we probably don't treat it. We'll leave it grow, and it's not a real problem. Now, in Spring Lake, there was a period there of 5 years where we were treating those blue shaded circles there on the west side of the lake and on the south side of the lake. But after 2006, the curlyleaf was not much of a problem. And for 10 years, we were checking it every year. Curlyleaf was not really growing to the heavy nuisance conditions where we needed to consider treatment to control these areas of heavy growth. So 2015 was okay, but 2016 it did come back and came back in these general areas here. In fact, we delineated 4 main areas totaling about 20 acres that were going to had the potential to produce heavy growth. Those were treated in 2016. Then we went back about a month after treatment to see what was the condition of the areas that were treated as well as the rest of the lake. The green dots on that lake indicate areas where there's curly leaf present but at light growth, and it's very sparse. So in fact, the areas that weren't treated didn't really produce that heavy growth, and so we were okay. The areas that were treated, they actually had very good control in 2016. We had either a few dots of light growth, a few areas of light growth, or we had mostly those brown dots, which represent curly leaf that was not actively growing, was dying back, and was not a problem. So for Spring Lake in 2016, a little bit different situation than the previous 10 years, but it was able to be controlled. Speaking of that, going back even a few years prior to 2002, here's what happened in 2000. This is what kind of spurred some of the active management for curly leaf in Spring Lake. And in 2015, we didn't treat at all. The conditions were relatively light, but 2016 did produce that type of curly leaf that did call for some action and some management. Here's kind of a summary going back the last 16 years. In 2000, that's the year that we had heavy growth, and we started that treatment program in 2002. And we were treating between 60 to 70 acres there for a number of years. Then after 2006, curly leaf was still present in the lake, but at light growth, and was not treated. In 2016, the distribution wasn't that much greater, but the abundance was. So that's why we treated that heavy growth in 2016. We have some numbers there of iron that was been dosed. I don't know if that is correlated with curly leaf control, but we do know that curly leaf is sensitive to iron in lakes, and that who knows, maybe some of those iron dosing applications in the past had some impact on curly leaf in Spring Lake. Just kind of a quick overview or a quick summary. You know, we just had some fellas talking about Joe is sampling soils out in the field on a grid pattern and sending them in to the University of Minnesota or to the soils lab. Back in 1999, we did the same thing in Spring Lake. We sampled the soils, the lake sediments, sent them to the University of Minnesota Soils Lab, and based on our previous experience, we knew kind of what the parameters were that would induce heavy growth of curly leaf pondweed. So when we put this on the map, Spring Lake, the green squares represent light growth, yellow squares represent the potential for moderate growth, and the red squares would represent the potential for the sediments to sustain heavy growth of curly leaf pondweed. And you can see that there's some yellows in there, and where we have some yellows and we have those reds in the shallower areas, that is in fact where we were getting curly leaf pondweed. So it is somewhat predictive. Fortunately, Spring Lake does drop off on the east side. It drops off fast enough that curly leaf has potential for some growth, but not really much to be managed or controlled. It's mostly on the west side and that south side. We've done some late summer assessments for curly leaf, and along with that, then we're trying to look at, that's kind of it's pretty darn close to what you'll get in July and August. Not perfect, but we are seeing that the plant community is somewhat stable in terms of its distribution. Its native plants seem to be increasing somewhat in abundance. So it's going in that right direction, and there's probably some influence from the impact of the alum treatment in Spring Lake. Still a ways to go. Well, upper and lower Pryor, we also do kind of the same technique. We delineate, and then areas that look like they could be treated are treated, and then we come back and we assess. So in 2016, we found 6 areas totaling about 16 acres that had the potential to produce heavy growth, and we delineated those for treatment, and most of those acreages are in Upper Pryor. There's probably only a couple of acres in Lower Pryor, and most of the bulk of the treatment was then in Upper Pryor here. So those are the areas that we delineated for treatment. Here's kind of what curlyleaf was looking like in some of these areas prior to treatment. And here are some maps supplied by the herbicide applicator showing his tracks. He covered the areas that we had delineated, and the results were pretty good. Here's April is the delineation. June 1st are the results, and I think it's blown up a little bit here. So these are the results after a herbicide treatment. Green dots are light curlyleaf growth, yellow dots are moderate, red dots represent heavy growth. And the areas that were delineated for treatment, we got pretty good control. There were some dots there at the south end of Upper Pryor, a few green dots, but that's relatively light growth. So that indicates that curlyleaf might have still been present, but not a problem. There's a few red dots up on Lower Pryor that came up. That curlyleaf grew up after we had delineated, but they were relatively sparse areas, and although it was somewhat heavy growth, not necessarily a nuisance condition. So control was pretty good in both Upper and Lower Pryor last year. Now, one of the questions that has come up is, treating curlyleaf, is there any impact to improving water quality and reducing phosphorus? If we reduce the curlyleaf early in the year, can we get also a reduction then in the phosphorus? Because we know when curlyleaf dies back, if it's heavy growth, it seems like it would release this phosphorus right into the water column right in June, late June and July. It's a good question. It's still being researched, but the indicators are that controlling curlyleaf does not really enhance necessarily water quality. By that I mean it doesn't necessarily reduce the phosphorus content in the water. And here's what seems to be happening. As curlyleaf dies back, it's the phosphorus that's in the tissue of the curlyleaf is being used by the microbes that are decomposing the curlyleaf plant. You know, the curlyleaf, look at it as a carbon source, and the microbes are working on the carbon. They need nutrients to grow as well. They're taking up the phosphorus, and not necessarily is that phosphorus going into algae growth. So it looks like if we don't control curlyleaf and it does die back, it does not necessarily enhance algae. There is probably some leaking into algae growth. So the question is then, when the DNR has been asking this too, can we get water quality improvements by curlyleaf control? And the jury is not completely settled on this, but indications are it may not improve water quality. Therefore, when we treat curlyleaf, it's looking like it is more for nuisance control and navigational, recreational control, knowing that curlyleaf does die back on its own by mid-June to late June. So these are the areas where we've seen some problem curlyleaf in Upper Pryor. It's mostly those two bays, the southern bay and then Mud Bay. And it's primarily because it's conducive to pretty good growth. They're shallow, they warm up, they have the sediments that are conducive to growth as well. So that's probably going to grow again this year as well, if we don't treat. Well, just kind of summarize some curlyleaf treatments in Pryor Lake. For a number of years, curlyleaf was not a big problem. The last few years, starting in 2013, there was some really some aggressive treatments. A lot of those acreages have been in Upper Pryor. Here is a curlyleaf growth potential map based on those sediment sampling or the soils. You can see in Lower Pryor, there's a lot of greens. The sediments just don't have the nutrient status, which is kind of good news for curlyleaf growth. And where there are some yellows, it drops off so fast, the contours, that the curlyleaf, it might not even hit the surface or be a real problem. However, in Upper Pryor, where it's shallower especially, even the yellow squares, which represent the potential for moderate growth can still be somewhat of a nuisance, and in some years will hit the surface, but typically not every year. Well, that kind of is our quick overview of our curlyleaf program. We had the opportunity this last year to go out and just do some plant surveys to characterize the natural resource base of some of these other lakes within the Watershed District. These are the lakes that we sampled for a one-time survey, a quantitative survey on these 6 lakes. Just as we'll get to the summary, but I can just tell you, these lakes are phenomenal. They're really it was quite a joy to be out there and work with them. They have, well, we'll see. I'll just break down each of these lakes real quick. For example, well, okay, we start with Arctic Lake. In Arctic Lake, it's the only lake out of the 6 that had no plants. It had transparency about 2 to 3 feet. It has probably a lot of carp, and that's probably a big factor. Carp can devastate these plant communities. So Arctic Lake, still a nice water body, has potential for plant growth, but we didn't find one submerged plant last year. And we sampled all those points. Well, the situation was a lot different in Buck Lake. Buck Lake had about 95% plant coverage. Those triangles represent number of species per site. And the bigger the triangle, the more species there were per site. It had pretty good diversity and very good plant coverage. And we would suspect in the water quality, likewise, is going to be, it kind of goes hand in hand. Good plant coverage, you get pretty good water quality as well, at least clear water. And that's a real positive situation. So Buck Lake was a real nice lake for aquatic plants. Kate's Lake, it had 87% coverage, and that's good coverage. Not quite the diversity. Those blue triangles represent 1 species per site, and then those triangles, then we have 2 or 3 or 4 species per site. The dominant plant in Kate's Lake is coontail. In fact, coontail is the dominant plant in these lakes that we're talking about, with some other species to boot, including some water lilies. One thing about Kate's Lake, we did find a couple sites with Eurasian milfoil, but it was at low densities and not really taking over the lake at all. Crystal Lake had also a real nice plant community, 82% coverage of aquatic plants. A rule of thumb is if you can get 40% coverage or more of aquatic plants, you have the potential for good water quality and good water clarity. And so these lakes are well over that percentage, and including Crystal Lake. Its diversity is good. Jeffers Pond, this lake had very good plant diversity. Those triangles there represent 3 and 4 species per sample site. It had plant coverage throughout almost the entire lake except for 1 point, so almost 100% coverage. One thing we did find in Jeffers Lake, though, one of the plants growing to pretty heavy conditions, in some cases it was Eurasian water milfoil. So Eurasian water milfoil hadn't been documented in there before, but probably because we haven't really sampled it much in the past. It's pretty widespread, but even though Eurasian milfoil is certainly a presence, look at those big triangles there. There's a number of species in there. In fact, coontail was still the dominant plant, although Eurasian water milfoil was pretty widespread. The last lake we looked at here last summer was Swamp Lake. I guess they probably called it Swamp Lake. It is pretty shallow. It had a very good plant coverage as well. 96%, I think there was 3 sites where there weren't any plants, and for the most part, fair to good plant diversity. And I would suspect, I didn't see the water quality results, but I suspect that lake probably has clear water as well. Yeah, question.
Steve, I have a question. Please compare coontail to curly-leaf pondweed in terms of both water quality and nuisance.
Sure. Well, coontail is a native plant, and coontail does not have a specific root system. It has holdfast that keeps it in place. So it gets almost all its nutrient needs from the water column. So from a water quality standpoint, coontail can be even better than some of our other aquatic plants because most rooted plants are getting their nutrients from the sediments. So coontail actually is a good water quality plant. Maybe the only downside is that coontail can also grow to be very heavy and can grow very thick. In fact, it's not an invasive species, but it can grow as heavy as some of our non-native species do. But the upside is that it has the ability to kind of keep the water clear when it is fairly abundant. So it's a good plant to have in a lake. The summary of those 6 lakes, you can see the plant coverage, and you can see the number of aquatic plant species is also pretty good. Once you get over 2 or 3 species, that's a pretty good diversity. It's a good start anyway. Lower Pryor probably has 16 to 18 to 20 species, but it's a little bit different setting, a little bit different situation. Over the course of the summer, have input from staff and a lot of good help too, so always appreciate that. So just to summarize then, these aquatic plants, it's an important metric to get, it's an important parameter to keep monitoring, because it has a direct impact on water quality. Non-native plants like curly-leaf pondweed and Eurasian milfoil, we're always on the lookout for those, and including any new non-native species, and they're in the news these days. We have starry stonewort up in Lake Coronis. We have brittle naiad over in Eden Prairie. Something to keep an eye open for. It doesn't matter if it's curly-leaf or it's Eurasian, they still vary from year to year. However, the sediment conditions that we have been monitoring give us some inkling what we might be able to predict or expect on an ongoing basis. And native plants in Spring Lake, we'll keep watching and see how that goes. With the alum treatment and some carp removal, those things are all going in the right direction to kind of help enhance the water quality, enhance aquatic plants, and once the aquatic plants get their toehold, then they can help sustain that water clarity as well. So with that, any questions?
Any questions for Steve? Managers, Woody?
Yeah, maybe a couple questions, Steve. I was when talking about your curly pondleaf treatments, the chemicals you use are not necessarily specific to that variety, right? So
that's right. You
attempt to get in there early when that's the dominant growth. Do you think that does have, I mean, has there been studies and analysis done on maybe an impact on the non-invasive plants?
That's a good point. The endothol is the active ingredient in this herbicide that we're using. It's a contact herbicide, which means it kills plants on contact if the plants are actively growing. Curlyleaf is actively growing in April and May, and so it is very susceptible and vulnerable to that contact herbicide. The native plants usually don't kick in and start growing until June, so they are relatively unimpacted. However, some native plants are going to start sprouting, and they could be impacted. Fortunately, those native plants are almost all perennials, so even if they get knocked back a little bit early, they still have a tendency to come back, whereas curlyleaf is not going to come back in that season for the most part. So yes, there is some potential for some collateral damage. That's where we want to treat early.
Gotcha. One other, one of the problems I want to challenge the district has is educating lakeshore property owners on the value of aquatic vegetation. We're on Lower Pryor. We're fortunate. We have coontail was really everywhere last year.
Yeah.
A lot of lakeshore owners, though, view these weeds as a problem for recreation. And I think that a challenge of the district is to get word out. I was really interested in your comments about coontail, which pulls the nutrients from the water rather than from the soil or the sediment. So, no, we have a challenge in terms of, we saw last year, there's still guys out there operating weed cutters on Lower, and I suspect they're probably not permitted. And I don't know, I wish people would be, there's a lot of awareness that we need to get, now lakeshore owners need to be educated in some of these issues, I believe.
I agree.
Manager Breitbach.
Mr. President, Steve, that herbicide that you put down, so how long does that residual have an effect? Is it just basically on contact or a couple days, or how long does that residual last in the water column?
That's a great question. So the terms they use are concentration and exposure time. Those are the two variables. Low concentration with a long exposure time can get you some effects. However, if you have a low low concentration and a short exposure time, you get very little impact at all. So we're adding a label. Well, it's not me. I don't do any of the herbicide applications. I'm just tracking this. But I do know that their concentration they put down has been about 1 part per million, for example. That lasts longer than it would in colder water than it would if you added that at 60 or 70 degree water, where it might only last for a day or so. In colder water, that herbicide, this endothol, can probably be still active for a good week or so under those cold water conditions, and that's why they get pretty good control early in the year, because you get a longer exposure time. So it's all has to do with concentration exposure time, CET. And so cold water has that advantage.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments, staff? We're good? Diane.
If I can just say one quick thing, Steve, thank you again. Since I've been on the board, your explanations and your coverage is thorough, it's to the point, it's easy to understand, and it's just absolutely terrific. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members, the curly leaf pondweed treatment in Upper Pryor is a voting item, and it ties in perfectly with what Mr. McComas was just talking about. So I'll turn it over to Jamie.
Right, so as you heard Steve talking about curly leaf treatments and the recent science that curly leaf might not actually impact water quality as much as we had once thought. We were considering not treating Upper Pryor Lake for curly leaf pondweed this year for a couple reasons. Mostly, Upper Pryor Lake does not have a lot of vegetation growing in the lake. It is 85% littoral, which means that 85% of the lake is shallow enough to grow vegetation, but only using our biobase maps and some of the surveys that Steve has done, it's averaging maybe 10% of the lake is growing vegetation, sometimes as low as 1% in certain years and up to 14. We've kind of seen that range. So I talked to Steve and the DNR and the University of Minnesota just to see if perhaps withholding treatment this year would be better, just so that we have some vegetation in the lake rather than basically killing off the little bit that's there, just so that we can have a little bit more habitat for the fish. And the actual, if I understood right, you said that the growth of curly leaf does use phosphorus while it's growing, so it's actually uptaking some phosphorus, or it's using it from the lake sediments. Okay, from the sediments. Okay. So, yeah, so the fact that it's not possibly impacting water quality as much as we thought, we wanted to give this kind of a trial run this year to see if we do withhold treatment, see what happens. And Steve would still be delineating and assessing to see how much it grows. And we'll be monitoring the lake to see if there is, in fact, a huge algae bloom after the die-off. But we would like the board to vote on whether or not it's okay to withhold treatment this year.
Okay, I don't see anything in the packet. Do we have a motion?
I did write something up, if that helps. Should I read?
No, that
okay.
will work.
The Board of Managers supports withholding herbicide treatment of curly leaf pondweed on Upper Pryor in 2017. Currently, only 10% of the lake experiences native vegetation growth. Since we haven't seen native plants flourishing in the areas we treat for curly leaf pondweed, we hope that withholding treatment may allow growth of more vegetation for aquatic species habitat. So that's what we have written up.
I'll make the motion for that.
Manager Hennis moves. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any questions or comments? Manager Howley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we had a budget of $13,000 for aquatic vegetation management, but $13,000 of it was a grant. So if we're not going to do this, does that line item just go away in our budget? And we obviously don't use the grant, right?
Jamie?
So we will still treat on Spring Lake and Lower Prior Lake, so there will be some money spent there. But we kind of break even either way because I don't know how to go into this much detail, but we cut the money from the budget because we were getting money from the Scott County is actually going to be paying for the treatment. So either way, if we treat or don't treat, it doesn't affect our bottom line budget. Does that make sense?
Any other discussions?
I just have a quick question. So does that mean that we will be using the $13,000 grant on for different species, invasive species treatment, but not curly-leaf pondweed? What does that mean?
So that $13,000 grant from the county is only whatever we use, it's what they'll give us. It's not to exceed, but we don't get it all if we don't use it all. So it will only be used for curly-leaf pondweed treatment on spring and lower lakes.
It can't be used for any other invasive vegetation species in those lakes. Is that what you're saying?
It is not able to be used for other vegetation.
Thank you.
Any more comments? I think we're ready for the vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Nay? Motion carries. So I think we are now moving on to 4.4, permit number 17.01, Living Hope Lutheran Church and School. We're voting on this is a voting application. And Maggie, I think you're going to introduce us to this.
Mr. Chair and managers, so Living Hope Lutheran Church is located to the north of Highway 42. If you went on County Road 18 going north, right as it starts to bend, it's on the left-hand side. I'm putting a map up on the screen that'll hopefully show up in a second, and this is the same map that was included in your board packet. So what they plan on doing at this property is they plan on expanding their existing building by about 11,000 square feet. And then along with that, they're going to expand their parking lot and then put another driveway kind of going down south towards Mule and Hart Road. And so this kind of construction affects 3 different rules in our permit rules. It's Rule C for land disturbance, Rule D for stormwater management, and Rule E for erosion and sediment control. And as I wrote about in the staff review, for the stormwater management piece, you can see on the map that there's like the areas shaded in the kind of the aqua color, like outlined in aqua. And so those are 2 existing stormwater basins on the property, and those will be removed with the construction of this project. However, they're going to put a pre-treatment basin in where the darker blue area is outlined, and they'll actually exceed their stormwater requirements for this project. But along with all this land disturbance that's going to happen, they're going to impact our existing conservation easement on the property. And that is outlined in the red. And so Living Hope Church contacted us actually pretty early on. I think it was even a year ago we were in contact. And so they've been with us every step of the way. And we don't have an existing plan in place to make up for the conservation easement amendment that'll have to happen. But we are going to be working on that. And so at this point, with all the information that you had in your packet, the board has to make a decision. So they can either approve or deny this permit application by April 30th. They have 60 days from the time they gave us a complete permit, or to provide written notice to the applicant of an extension of the 60-day period. And so at this time, staff is recommending that we do option 1. And so in your packet, there was 4 different options. We're recommending option 1, that the project be approved subject to the condition subject to the application submitted with the supplemental information submitted by the applicant's engineer and with the conditions noted below. And so there's all these different conditions that we kind of put on this one. I mean, you've seen this before with the city applications. We have a lot of these. A couple of them to note, though, that'll highly affect us is number 7, which is, again, that easement. They're going to have to submit an easement amendment request to the district, and we're requesting that they do that within 30 days after you approve this application. And then the request must be accepted, of course, by the board prior to construction. We want something in place, like the easement wouldn't have to be recorded at that point, but we'd like you to have at least proved their plan for amending the easement. And then we're going to give them 4 months from the day that we issue the permit to actually complete the easement. So with title work, you know, as we've talked about before, that can kind of hold things up. So 4 months should be sufficient amount of time to do that. The other thing to note is number 8. It's that we're asking them to prepare, execute, and provide to us a declaration for maintenance of stormwater management facilities. And so this new pretreatment basin that they're creating on this property to manage that stormwater, it's not like on a city property where they're going to be maintaining it. So we want to make sure that that's maintained over time. So that's what that agreement is. So we're going to, you know, make sure that that stormwater pond is always going to be in place, that it's not going to be breached, they're not going to take it out, that it's going to be maintained over time. And that pretty much wraps it up. So if you have any questions, ask them now. Otherwise, we're asking the board to do option 1 with those conditions.
Any questions from the managers?
Yes, Mr. President, I have a question. First of all, I guess, did our legal people look at this? Or is there any reason that they should? Okay. Then will this be recorded? Because we've had trouble going back with property where it's been recorded along with the title, because it's going to be after the fact? Will there be any kind of recording, you know, a document that goes along with the title?
Manager Brightback, so the, you're referring to the easement, right? Yeah, so that amendment will be just like our other easement amendments that we're doing now. They'll be recorded in the county recorder's office and it'll go on the title.
Then I just have one other question, and that prepare, execute, provide that number 8 for a proposed stormwater fusion. Okay, so except, is there a length of time that we're declaring it be maintained, or is it a perpetual forever?
Mr. Chair, Manager Brightback, so it would be perpetual. I mean, until they do something different on the property, we're going to make sure that the stormwater is managed.
Manager Howley.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Why haven't they submitted the easement amendment request?
Mr. Chair, Manager Howley, so we've been working with them very closely on this, but they're kind of on a deadline. And so we've worked with them enough to know that they're very committed to doing this with us. They just didn't pull it together in time for this board meeting because we need also time to review it and take a look at it. One of the things that they're going to submit with their easement amendment request is to work with me and Carl too on where exactly those easement boundaries are going to be, because we want to make sure that there's the same amount of conservation value, and that's going to take a little time. So they're getting this permit in advance. You know, the next step is to get that City of Shakopee permit and other permits they need, and then we're just going to work with them slowly on that easement to make sure it's done right.
Manager Howley.
I don't see the rush or why we need to approve this. Even without the 60 days, we have till April 30th. So I, for one, want to see the easement worked out before I give support for the permit. So I either say we just table it till next month, or we do option 2 and give them the additional 60-day notice. But personally, I want to see how they're going to rectify the easement before we give them approval of the plan. That's where I sit.
Other comments? Other thoughts?
I concur with Manager Howley. I think it'd be more reasonable to wait on and get the easement.
Staff?
Mr. Chair, managers, is it prudent to seek a comment from the two people from Leave and Hope who are here to see how that works out with their timeline?
Sure, they're here. Let's always happy to have people here with us. So I think as you come up, what Manager Howley has suggested is that we, as an option, might consider number 2, which would be to table the item. Manager Howley, are you suggesting maybe we consider table the number 2?
Mr. Chair, unless they tell us their schedule of the easement, I mean, I think maybe just, tabling it until next month. I mean,
is that number 2 on the options, or
that's neither of, that's option 3, I guess. Or option, table the item for future, number 2, sorry.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Sorry.
Welcome, thank you. If you'd just introduce yourself and.
Hi, I'm Kevin Lallam, and I'm the Building Committee Chair for Bloomington Living Hope Lutheran, and heading up this project.
My name is Ben Ford. I'm with Rader & Associates. We're the civil engineering firm that has been retained by the architect for the project.
So are you the person that could tell us what this might do to your schedule if we wait for a month?
Well, so part of this is we wanted to some extent, this is really a complicated project because there also involves a county interest in this project where there's a pond that's being displaced. We kind of wanted to take baby steps at different pieces to see how like the engineering for the stormwater management might affect the easement agreement. And I think I've been talking to Carl even just this afternoon or this morning, and we saw that there might be some dovetailing or synergy between what we do with the stormwater management and the easement agreement. So we didn't want to get too far out in front of putting an entire package together until we had some understanding of that there was going to be agreement on how we were handling the stormwater management and with the county. So that's the reason we've been stepping back a little bit with the easement agreement. We wanted to understand where we stood with that before we started to put together an amendment to the easement.
Carl, anything to add to that?
Other than to say that, yes, I've had discussions both with Nick Adams and Ben Ford at Reader, and I think we have a good plan of action for how we'll maintain that conservation easement value by maintaining, essentially, I mean, the main thing you need to know in the exhibit that's still in front of you, those teal basins, as Maggie said, the 2 in the southeast corner are proposed to be disappearing and under parking. The county is okay with that, according to some documents that just came over today. And we've looked at the stormwater management in terms of rate, water quality, and volume control, which in essence become fairly straightforward in that the red areas are landlocked. So what they're really doing is providing pretreatment in advance of maintaining all runoff on site. And we'll continue to do that. The shape of the footprint, because they're impacting the southern of the 2 pink areas or brown areas, whatever it is on your screens, as I discussed with Ben today, we'll look to offset via creation of additional storage on the main basin and planting that kind of expanded area in native vegetation. So I think there's a clear path here. Obviously, your prerogative if you want to see that path laid out in advance of approving or moving forward as staff had recommended.
So I guess what we'd be interested in is, I think there is some concern, there's some support for tabling, but there's some concern about putting you off schedule if we do that. So I guess we're looking for some direction from you on whether a month would throw you off schedule or not.
Well, we were hoping to start construction late May, early June. So we are going to the city, that's April 6th. So, and I don't know how this all ties together. You guys are experts at this. I'm purely a novice. But, we're just, like Ben said, we're trying to get our ducks in a row, but we're trying to do it methodically to make sure everybody's in agreement with each other. And we felt this was the first step to get to that point.
So the next meeting would be like April 12th or something. When is the...
Mr. Chair, it's the 11th.
I'm sorry?
It's the 11th of April.
Okay. And when would the city require this easement when you go on the 6th? Is that?
I'm not sure of that.
Okay. Do you suspect they would want the easement completed by April 6th?
It probably becomes kind of like a chicken and the egg. Who's going to go first? Someone has to approve it first, is what we find with different watersheds, and as long as they're communicating with the city and likewise, the staff is communicating with the city, I think they'd see we're making progress on, again, trying to bring both parties' interests together at the same time.
Okay, I guess one more question then. Do we think we can solve the Manager Howley's concerns in a month?
Mr. Chair, managers, with our due diligence and our title review and that sort of thing, it'll take longer than a month, but they could start the easement application process and at least, get an agreement in place and get as far as we can, but it's not likely going to close by the next board meeting.
I'm sorry, it's not like we can do what by the next board meeting?
Mr. Chair, it closed on the easement amendment, so that completing an easement amendment can't really take place in a month. But they can start the easement amendment application and submit all of that, and we can start working with them on it by the next meeting.
So just so we know our options here, approving the number one is approving the application subject to the conditions noted herein, which one of those would be to complete the easement amendment. Is that what this suggests? Correct?
Yeah, so one of the conditions, number 7, is that they submit an amendment request within 30 days. And then that has to be accepted by the board, but we're giving them like a 4-month window after the permit is issued to actually close on the easement and record it in the county recorder's office.
Okay, so I think our options, managers, are either number 1, which staff has suggested, or number 2, which Manager Howley has suggested. So I'm looking for a motion. Carol, please.
Just add, while it's not possible to complete the easement transaction and closing on all that within a month, it's certainly possible to lay out the draft paperwork and have a staff recommendation to say, we agree with this plan and stand behind this plan. The title work and everything else is something that would still have to continue afterwards, correct, Maggie?
Which I understood could be conveyed to the city, and the city would probably be comfortable knowing that process was in the works.
Correct. I'll just try to clarify this. We would anticipate, because we would want to see ideally approval for that easement amendment at your next board meeting. So we'd anticipate making application for that in the next few days, or by next week sometime, let's say. A little more work with Carl and with Maggie to work out the details of what that would look like. But the probably is, I guess we just want to make sure that as we move forward that we don't come to the next board meeting and find out that you have an issue with, as the board, with our stormwater as it's been presented so far, where it would derail the easement application.
Manager Howley.
Thank you. I don't think we have any issues with the stormwater plan. We trust the engineer did his review, and he'll put whatever conditions he needs there from a technical aspect. I'm just trying to limit our risk, and it seems logical that the easement be submitted for us to review along with the permit, because they go hand in hand. So again, if you can't start construction until we approve the easement anyways, so there's, from my perspective, no risk from the applicant to rush this through tonight, other than their comfort level of the plan itself. And I, for one, don't have any issues with the plan itself, and no issues with the plan itself, but I'm just trying to limit our risk and see a logical path forward. So I understand why you submitted early, but hopefully our verbal feedback is good enough. But I still stand with option number 2.
Go with.
So what I'm hearing is there's some comfort level that we could do this in 30 days, and in that case, Manager Howley, if you would like to make a motion, I assume for number 2. Option.
I'll make a motion for option 2.
Manager Howley is moving to table the item until future specified date. The next board meeting and provide the applicant with direction on the issues that have been discussed, and I think you understand what those issues are. Is there a second?
I second that.
Seconded by Manager Breitbach. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you for being here tonight. We appreciate it. I think managers, for the due diligence of this board, we looked at this map a couple of weeks ago and thought this was on Highway 13. I think 3 of us looked at it.
Oh, is that right?
We were trying to find the church on Highway 13. So.
No, you just take 42 west of 13.
No, I know, it's right in my backyard.
Yep.
Yep. So that's why we have staff and an engineer. We're going to move on to 4.5, manager presentations on, so we must be up to page 11 or 12 or 13. Page 13, staff.
Did you want to do any presentations, managers?
Mr. President, the only thing I have is I want everyone to be aware that in about 30 to 45 days, the solar farm being proposed just east of Jordan, between Jordan and Prior Lake on State Highway 282 is to begin, with a completion date estimated for the end of August. There'll be 2 farms. One is a 5 megahertz farm, and the other one's a 3.5 megahertz solar farm. And just to give you an idea, I recently read an article that the People's Republic of China is building a 10 square mile solar farm in western China comprising of over 1 million solar panels. So this is definitely the sign of the future that's coming.
And they're all made in the USA.
And they're all made in the USA.
Okay, having heard the manager presentations, we will move on to programs and projects 4.6 or 7 at this point on page 13.
Okay, as we always start off with the level of Prior Lake, we are at 902.68. It seems we've been holding just above the weir the entire winter, and it doesn't seem to be changing much, but it's still in relatively good condition. Spring Lake is now thawed, so we're that level logger is up and running, and looks like it's pretty stable there as well.
So Jamie, does this look normal, a normal year? You know, I mentioned to you that there's a lot of water up towards Pike Lake all winter, and the outlet is running still as strong as it has most of the winter. So would you expect this level to be going down normally this time of year before a snow melt, which we're not going to see this year?
From my experience, it's not unheard of. We did have a couple winters recently where the water did flow all winter long. So it's, I think it was 2011, we had it flowing all winter, and another one fairly recently. So it's, I would say it's a little bit higher than normal, but it's not.
But this flat curve is maybe somewhat normal.
I don't know, it just seems like we're just getting this consistent flow. It's not, you know, it's just, I don't know how to say if it's normal or not, but yeah, well, it's just like we keep getting a little bit here and there that keeps it going, and there's no evaporation really, or not much to speak of at this point, so I would expect
normally we would be seeing a snow melt this time of year.
Right, yeah. I would expect as the frost comes out that we'll probably see some more infiltration, and then the lakes will probably start dropping a little quicker, and some more heat to help with the evaporation.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, I think this is a record early opening for the ferrochloride treatment system. The city opened the facility on March 6th. Everything has been operating perfectly, and no issues whatsoever, so we started sampling last week. We will begin sampling the rest of our monitoring sites the beginning of April, but as soon as the dosing occurs at the ferric chloride site, we need to monitor those sites weekly for the Pollution Control Agency. We also have some record ice out dates for this year. Specifically, Prior Lake was ice-free on March 8th. The next earliest ice out was in 1987 on March 14th, which was a full 6 days earlier. So this is quite a record. And then there were some smaller lakes that thawed on March 7th, Haas, Spring, Pike, and Fish Lake. I haven't been in contact. I'm a little suspicious that maybe Haas is refrozen, as I noticed Little Prior out here has refrozen. But Buck Lake never thawed, and it's still frozen, so that was a little strange. And yeah, so then you can see our other records on the right-hand side of this screen there.
So Pike Lake was frozen again this morning.
It was, okay, thank you. So yeah, I talked to the state climatologist yesterday to see what to do if they do refreeze, and he said, I don't really know, but they said they think that they'll keep the first thaw as the date, but then just take note of the second thaw as well. So if you don't mind letting me know when it thaws again, that would be great, Fred.
That was my question.
Okay.
Well, I think it was the wind that really did most of these lakes in.
Yeah, I think so. And Buck Lake is kind of hidden. It's kind of in a little cove, so it must have been more protected. So yeah, quite the record there.
Okay, so we recently posted 2 internships for the summer. These are unpaid internships similar to last summer. We got really lucky having Oliver help us out, and we're hoping to get 2 more eager interns. One would be a water resource intern, and they would help us monitor the conservation easements, finish up some of those baseline reports, do a little bit of water quality monitoring. So this year we don't have Sarah, so as appropriate, we're going to try to use this person for potentially using them for biobase. They're going to be doing Prior Lake outlet channel inspections, making sure those culverts are clear, and then helping out a little bit with the FEMA projects, and then doing permit inspections as well. And then the other intern will be our conservation outreach intern. And they're going to also help with those conservation easements by having 2 people go out during one monitoring visit. That'll free up both Catherine and my time, and so it'll be really helpful in the office. And then, but most of their time is going to be spent on education and outreach activities. And this is just one statement, but we have a whole list of things for them to do, such as, not just the website updates and like the social media accounts, but they're going to be doing story maps, Esri story maps that Jamie's experimented with, and we have all this raw footage from I think it's 2013 of the carp seine event. And so that intern, to the best of their ability, would put together a video for us that we could post online. They would be helping us organize different events. We're going to have that event over at Fish Point Park this summer, and so they would help with that. We just have a variety of education and outreach things for them to do, a lot of stuff which Megan used to do, and we're really hoping we get some good candidates. And just for those who are out there watching the TV and want to learn more, they can find out more at our website at plslwd.org. Oops. And then just a quick carp management update. We ordered and received that Yagi antenna, so now we can go out whenever we would like and go find those fish ourselves. We have a new volunteer on Spring Lake who's willing to lend us his boat, and so we can go out on Spring Lake as well as Upper Prior and go find those fish. We tested it out, it works great, and we want to give a big shout out, thank you to the Prior Lake Association for helping fund that. And then we do plan on doing 2 temporary carp barriers this spring. One of them is at the Spring Lake outlet, and then one of them is at the Silt Pond, where we found some carp go what we think is to spawn last spring. And so we're going to block them from those locations. We did apply for that CPL grant, but we haven't heard about it yet, if we've got it or not. They're going to let us know by April 1st. So if it's by April 1st, we'll have a really fancy barrier over at the desilt pond that I'll encourage you guys to check out. Otherwise, it'll just be a similar one like you see on this slide. It'll be stakes in the ground and PVC pipe going across, just blocking the larger reproductive carp from going upstream. And then we've been working really hard, Diane and I have, on getting this LCCMR proposal together. So LCCMR is the state lottery money, and it stands for Legislative Citizens Commission on Minnesota's Resources, I believe. And so we've been working with different partners. So the beauty about the LCCMR grant is that our PCA grant ends June 30, 2018, and then this one would pick up on July 1st. So, we did this great big effort with this new grant, and we're doing these great things. We want to continue those efforts and do even more innovative things for carp management. And so we're partnering with SMSC, Lower Minnesota River, Scott WMO, and the city of Prior Lake, city of Shakopee, and we're trying to pull together something a little bit larger, a little bit more ambitious, and then solving a lot of the problems that we ran into, such as Upper Prior Lake has zebra mussel, and it has Eurasian water milfoil, and if a commercial fisherman goes in there and nets it, they can't use that net because now it's infected. And so they got to let it dry out, they've got to let it decontaminate, and it slows them down. It makes it less appealing for them to go in there when we need them to get in there. And so it would be purchasing additional nets to store in Prior Lake just for that purpose, so we don't have to worry about that. It's just thinking about the innovative barrier that we want to do over the desal pond, that barrel style. It's looking at a whole avenue of things that we haven't looked at before because they're too expensive. So hopefully, cross your fingers, we'll get that, but we're not going to apply for it until May, but right now we're doing a lot of grunt work and drafting and working with partners trying to figure it out. And then just lastly, I know the Farmer-led Council talked earlier, but we've been working really hard on their idea of this cover crop reverse auction. They all seem to have experience with the CRP reverse auction, which I thought was a great idea. And so we've done that. And so I just wanted to make sure we mention that the deadline for this is April 25th. And then we're going to let farmers know if they've got it by May 1st so that they can start planning for it. But I do have the fact sheets and applications here if any of the managers want to look at it. But people, again, can go online to our website, to the Farmer-led Council page to learn more.
We are in the process of doing a lot of updates. The memorandum of agreement for the cooperators for the Prior Lake outlet channel and outlet structure is underway. We're working with the Technical Advisory Committee first, and the original agreement was put together primarily for the construction of the outlet structure itself, and so there's a lot of information there that's outdated. So we're trying to take care of some of the housekeeping issues, but also address some of the policy questions. For instance, if there's a culvert and it was privately owned, but we help a landowner repair that, whose responsibility is it from then on? So we're starting to hit some of those challenging questions as we're moving through the revision. Our hope would be to get that revised by this quarter, but we are running into some things that are slowing us down. So we'll keep plugging away at it. The other thing is the operating and maintenance manual for the Prairie Lake outlet structure. And that was something that we had talked about in our flood study, as you recall. And that's something that we're required by the Department of Natural Resources to update in order to get permission to open the low flow gate. And the low flow gate process is something that we have used in the past, but it primarily focuses on snowmelt. We have asked for the DNR to give us permission to open it in other months like August and December of 2015. So it's not very practical any longer to stick to that schedule that is in that manual. So right now we're working with our engineer. Carl is taking the lead on providing some support on revisions there. We are going to put together some kind of strategy on how to make a determination if we're going to open the low flow gate or not. So our hope is within the next few months we'll be finished with that and run it up the flagpole. I think, Carl, we said in May of this year, give it over to the DNR as a draft and have them send it around for review. So we're doing a lot of paperwork now, but I'm actually kind of excited about it. These are things that have been sitting on the back burner for a while, and it's time to bring them forward and get them done.
Any comments or questions? Thank you. So we're moving on to bog policy. This is a vote, and it's on page somewhere, 2020.
Floating bog policy, and this is something that has been underway for quite a while. It is a joint effort of Spring Lake Township, the City of Prior Lake, our Watershed District, as well as Scott County. And what this issue is primarily the bog issues occur on Spring Lake, where a portion of a cattail bog becomes dismantled from the rest of the large bog, and it floats around. And if it floats around and gets to become a navigational hazard, Scott County will get in there and remove it or move it back to where it was located originally and stakes it down. But what we wanted to do with this policy is be really clear on who's responsible for what, because what will happen is that we'll get a call from a resident and we're all going, I don't know, and we'll go like this, and we've decided that we really need to get this in writing so that everybody is really clear on how we're going to handle this. So first of all, what we're trying to say at the very beginning of this policy is that even though people see floating bogs as a nuisance, they are actually great to help with shoreline protection. And so one of the things we'd like to encourage people to do is look at bogs differently. Look at them in a more positive light than a negative light. They are, as part of the benefits, they provide fish and wildlife habitat, they buffer shorelines from pollutants, and they provide other environmental benefits. Water plants are the primary producers in the aquatic food chain, and they convert chemical nutrients in the water and soil into plant matter, which becomes food for life. So floating bogs are, as I indicated, usually the cattail bogs. They can cause damage if they collide with docks or create the potential for flooding if they settle in an area that impedes existing drainage area. So as I mentioned earlier, Scott County's Sheriff's Office is responsible for determining whether or not a floating bog represents a navigational hazard and how to address it. So if the sheriff determines it is, as I indicated earlier, the sheriff will relocate the bog. And if anyone sees a floating bog that they are feeling is a navigational hazard, they should call the Scott County Sheriff's Office. The Department of Natural Resources has a role here as well. It provides advice and permitting approval on bog disposition. So if you want to move a bog, you have to get a permit from the Department of Natural Resources. And any bogs that are lodged on state-owned dams or other DNR property are the responsibility of the Department of Natural Resources to remove it. And also other state agencies can get money from the Department of Natural Resources to remove bogs. The law further states, however, if a floating bog becomes grounded and there is no evidence to identify the responsible party or parties, the local government must assume responsibility. So we have a section here called the public property's owner responsibility. So floating bogs that have become wedged on public property, including the Spring Lake Weir, which we have some experience with, is owned by Scott County. And so the responsible owner to take care of a bog that's hung up on the Spring Lake Weir would be Scott County. The property owner will determine if there's any action to take, and they're under no obligation to remove the bog unless it's blocking water flow and causing flooding in Spring Lake Township, the city of Prior Lake, and our district. We will not dispose of or remove any bogs on public property. Now that includes Spring Lake Township, city of Prior Lake, and the Prior Lake Watershed District. The private property's owner's responsibility is to, first of all, they have a number of options. Number one, they can let it be. As I mentioned, the bogs provide multiple environmental benefits. Number two, if they want to do something with it, they have to obtain a permit and remove the bog material. They can also obtain a permit and hire an outside firm to remove the bog material. And I've mentioned there are a couple of companies that I've called who will help the homeowner remove the bog. So what we're asking for here, managers, is support of the floating bog policy. We're getting into that season where we're going to have some again, and we'd like to be ready. Our partners, Spring Lake Township and the city of Prior Lake, as well as Scott County, I hope, will be passing this policy. Well, ultimately approving a policy. The same policy, pardon me? Where it never went up, yes.
I move that we accept the bog policy as written.
Second.
I'll second.
Manager Spitzmuller. So any discussion, any further discussion or comment?
Mr. Chair.
Manager Howley.
Thank you. Just a quick question. So Scott County is okay with what's written, their sheriff's department? I mean, they kind of agree with what we're stating here?
Mr. Chair, Manager Hawley, yes, they do.
And the DNR kind of agrees with what's stated here? We're not stating something that's not, you know.
We pulled it off of their website.
Okay. Under the public property owner's responsibility, the last statement, it says, so it says we're not obligated to remove a bog. And then the last sentence says, we will not remove a bog. Is that true? Is there a time, place of unknown that maybe Spring Lake Township does remove a bog on their property that they own? I mean, the word will not seems a little presumptuous, if that's the right word, you know.
Well, Mr. Chair, Manager Hawley, I think what this is addressing is when we had some bogs last year, they ended up on public property. And we are under the impression that they were put there by other property owners. So the point here is that if, first of all, it's illegal to move a bog, as I indicated earlier. But second of all, if it ends up on public property, like the city of Prior Lake's property, they're not going to remove it. It'll stay there. Yes.
Period. No matter.
Period.
Okay.
But, you know, again, earlier we said it's up to the property owner to decide how to dispose of it. But this is basically indicating to the public, this is our philosophy. This is how we're going to handle those.
And the last comment I have is it says draft at the top. Isn't this the final version?
Well, once you approve it, it would be the final version.
Okay. So.
Good comments, good discussion. Any others?
Mr. President, I have one. Being that I live on the lake that's this whole bog thing has developed from, I'm fine with voting on it from the watershed's perspective because we certainly have no business getting involved in taking bogs off the lake. I 100% agree with that. The issue I have is the bogs are coming from the wetland that's attached to the lake, and the lake is owned by the state and is facilitated by the DNR. If someone has a bog that's developed on their own shoreline, their private property shoreline, absolutely, it's their obligation. But I question that it should be mitigated if it comes loose by the owner of that wetland. One thing that could be done is on an annual basis, the DNR, or maybe via the sheriff's office, could do an inspection of that area and visually look and see if there's any sections that are starting to come loose. And it would be simple and only a matter of a few minutes to simply get a stake and stake it to the bog, the area that's stable. If they see an unstable section, they could easily use wooden stakes and pound it into a stable section next to it, which could well preclude the thing ever coming loose. Do you have any comment on that?
Diane.
Mr. Chair, Manager Hennis, I'm wondering if this would be something that would be better to talk to the Scott County Sheriff's Office, because they're out there more. And they would, I'm assuming, they really understand bogs better, and they actually have done that. They have moved them back and staked them in. So I think given the fact that we're talking about a state agency that's very large and very bureaucratic, this is a policy we wanted to get in place this spring. So I would recommend that we consider talking to the Scott County Sheriff's Office to see if they would also do an inspection periodically when they're out there anyways that might prevent bog from breaking apart. Now, I also understand there are some homeowners that the big bog is right by their property and their docks, and they will actually cut pieces off. So that's something that the sheriff's office wouldn't have any control over. But, you know, for weak areas of a bog, that's a different thing.
I mean, I think what I say makes perfect sense, and an ounce of prevention could forestall a lot of issues for private property owners later on in the season. I would be willing to volunteer to go with whoever staff you're going to assign to talk to the sheriff's office. I'd be happy to go in there, because I think there's a fairness issue here too. But again, as is related to the watershed policy, yes, I'll absolutely vote for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Manager Hennis, for volunteering to work with staff to approach the sheriff's office. But at this point, we're going to look for a motion. Was that a motion?
Yes.
There was already a motion.
That Mary Ann, second.
Lost track of it.
Okay, you second too.
Ready to go. All right. Then, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to MOD, I think we've also discussed this for quite a while. I assume this starts on 22. That's the Article 10 reference. Is that a MOD reference? It refers to a corporation but doesn't define the corporation.
Mr. Chair and members, this is a real simple request. As you know, the Minnesota Association of Watershed Districts is undergoing a reorganization. Their lobbyist and their administrative assistant are moving on into retirement. The administrative assistant has left. The lobbyist remains, and that's Ray Bone, and he will be maintaining his position as a lobbyist through the 2018 legislative session, and then he'll be done. But in the meantime, there needs to be a decision made by the members of the organization on how to proceed with administration, and then ultimately, once Ray retires, how to deal with the lobbying capacity. So the way the bylaws are written now, however, any major decisions cannot be made any other time but at the annual meeting, which is right after Thanksgiving. So what we're asking for here is for your support of a resolution asking, or basically approving your support of them having a special meeting to discuss this. And that special meeting would be at the summer tour, and that will be held in late June. So that's simply what this is asking. They need at least 15 watershed districts to approve this in order to be able to move ahead with a discussion of the issue at their June meeting.
Okay, we're looking for a motion to request MOD or support a special membership meeting in the spring. Is there a motion, Manager Hennis?
I'll make the motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any more discussion?
I have a question. What is the status, Diane, of Madeline Bone going forward, the daughter-in-law? Is she going to stay on? What's her status in the future?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Manager Hawley, as far as I know, there's no status. I was on a transition committee, and now I'm continuing on because I was in the transition committee to help put together a plan on hiring administrative support. So there's no guarantee here that she will be continuing on. I think that the people that I've worked with, the volunteers, agree that we need to be more professional as an organization, and rather than having that association administered in someone's home, that it actually needs to be in an office where we have professional staff located. So there is, as I said, there's no intention at this point to continue on with the way we've been doing it, which is she operates out of Ray Bone's home.
I would just follow up question is I'm very leery of the nepotism angle on this, and I think you are too, because we've talked about this. So I hope that'll be firmly addressed going into the future. The other question is, have they made preparations for a rental office yet? Are they going to move into a Watershed District-owned office space?
Yeah,
what's the status of that?
Mr. Chair, Manager Hennis, they're still working on that. I understand the Capital Region Watershed District is building their own building, and that was one of the watershed districts that offered to have space available. But I don't think anything's firmed up yet.
Thank you.
Okay, motion on the table. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. We're moving on to Ducks Unlimited, which is a whole lot of real estate language that we sort of looked through last meeting, and I think there was one change, Maggie, to all of this document.
All right, Mr. Chair, managers, so this is the same property that you guys saw a while back when we brought it to the board. And I apologize for not being able to bring it last month, but we did have some title issues come up that I wanted to make sure we're going to be absolutely cleared before I asked you to sign the purchase agreement. So just as a quick refresher, this is just on the south side of Spring Lake. It's right off of Highway 13, and it's adjacent to our existing Ducks Unlimited wetland parcel. It's a 10-acre property. It is almost completely wetland, and it's a key piece for us because it's part of the stream that goes from right underneath Highway 13, underneath that culvert, and out to Spring Lake. So if we ever did want to do a restoration, specifically wild rice restoration, this is a key piece to have. So one of the title issues that came up was ownership of the property. There's three of the original owners that have deceased since, and so finding the right person to sign that purchase agreement, we found out that the right people didn't, and so that was one of the issues. And then the other concern that I wanted to make sure was cleared up was that there's about 1/10 of an acre on the southern side of this property. You can kind of see it on the map. It's just to the left of the creek, but they've been haying it, so it's about 1/10 of an acre that's been being hayed. And then there's this sign on it, which you can see in the lower left-hand corner. It's Yes.
Klingberg Excavating.
And so they have a sign on the property. We went out there with a GPS unit and found the corner, and we're like, oh no, there's a sign on this property. And so I've been in touch with Judy and Lee Klingberg, and they were completely unaware of this. They didn't know this extra 10-acre parcel existed. They thought they owned clear to the other neighbor on the east side, and so. But they were very nice and amenable, and Lee said that he would move the sign as soon as we have it marked and we purchased the property. So we would likely just have the Soil and Water Conservation District, survey it for us, and then he'll move it. And then we were going to get into an agreement with him to allow him to keep on haying. So if you drive past the property now, you'll see a lot of hay bales out there. So he has the opportunity to use the hay bales. He doesn't sell them. He just kind of uses them. But he said the main purpose of him haying that area is because I guess there was a fire out there along Highway 13 a while back. And he said it's a fire hazard. Like, if the fire continues along that direction, it can, wipe out some of the other homes. And so he uses it as a fire deterrent as well. So he doesn't really make a profit off of the area that he's haying. It's good for water quality if he takes those hay bales off, because it takes some of those nutrients out of the water that would eventually deteriorate and go in. So we'd like to enter into an agreement with him as soon as we do purchase it. But so from our perspective, and we have had a real estate attorney look at all this, the purchase agreement and the title, and all the title issues will be resolved, and they've signed the purchase agreement. And we did have earnest money in the original one, but we took that out because we plan to close hopefully by the end of the month, if not like early April. And so with that, earnest money didn't make sense, you know. Why give them $1,000 when you're going to get the full $5,000 a couple weeks later? So, so that's the changes in the purchase agreement. I feel really comfortable with how the title looks, and we're ready to purchase it if you guys want to make a motion.
So we're looking for a motion for staff to sign this agreement, Diane?
Correct. It would be Diane who would sign it at your
So
direction.
the district administrator sign this purchase agreement. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Manager Hennis.
Charlie, did you second?
Second.
Okay, Manager Howley. Any other discussion, questions?
I have a couple questions. Now, there is some piles of dirt out there, too, that they're questioning whether they're on their land or ours. Is that right or wrong?
Manager Hennis.
I know the
yes.
sign is, right?
Oh, pardon?
The Klingberg excavating sign
Oh.
is on.
That is absolutely, when you had mentioned the dirt piles last time, I went
Yeah.
out there and with the GPS, and it is definitely not on our property.
Oh, it
It's-
isn't? Okay.
It's actually pretty far away, so it's,
Okay.
that's a.
Then the other
good thing
quick
that you
question I
mentioned
have is the haying. You and I talked about this, and Diane knows about the haying industry from her horse experience. You know, hay goes for a pretty good amount of money. I don't know how many bales he had the big rounds out there, right? Do you know off the top of your head how many big rounds were out there? Half a
Manager
dozen,
Hennis,
10?
I would guess maybe like half a dozen, yeah, maybe 10.
I mean, maybe it's too small of an issue, but let's just get it on the record that it does have some value, you know, and that, you know, I think maybe what we should do is just determine the value. If it's, you know, if you're only talking 70, 80 bucks, 90 bucks, something like that. But if you start talking multiples of $100, I think we should look at it. That's all.
Okay, any other questions, comments? The motion has been moved. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay? Motion carries. So we won't see all of this paper next month? We're done. Good. All right, the next one is the buffer enforcement, and this is a vote.
Mr. Chair and members, this is the buffer law compliance that we talked about in the workshop. For the audience, this is required by state law now that the Watershed District responds to a request by legislation to determine whether or not we want to be the enforcement entity of the buffer law for property owners within our district. So what the law is stating, it's called Minnesota Statutes Chapter 103F.48, is saying that by November 1st, 2017, landowners have to have buffers that are adjacent to public waters. And public waters are a number of things. They're water basins, they're waters of the state that have been finally determined to be public waters, meandered lakes, water basins that have a specific purpose, such as trout lakes, game lakes, public waters, wetlands, et cetera. Those are all required to have a 30-foot minimum width with a 50-foot average width for the buffer. By November 1st, 2018, there's a 16.5-foot minimum width buffer on lands adjacent to public ditches. And those are all, both of those cases, they're identified and mapped on a buffer protection map by the Soil and Water Conservation Service. The SWCD has given us a map that indicates what properties are required by law to have buffers. And we basically have 2 parcels in our district that are considered likely not compliant to meet that first deadline, which is buffers on public waters. 2 additional parcels that need further review in 2017. In 2018, which is the buffer on the public ditches, out of 54 parcels where a buffer is required, 8 are likely not compliant, 15 need review, and 31 are likely compliant. So if the district decides to accept jurisdiction to enforce the buffer law, and these would be to follow up on properties that the SWCD tells us are not compliant. And if we choose to accept that we will enforce the law, we are required to adopt a process that has been specified by the Board of Water and Soil Resources. We also are required to comply with the fee schedule that they set up. And staff recommends that the board not consider to not accept jurisdiction for enforcement. And we recommend this because we believe that there would be a number of financial and personnel resources that would be required to do the enforcement. The Watershed District only has 5 staff, and we've got a lot to do already. We don't know what the funding will actually be. It's very uncertain right now. Last year, we had expected that there would be $10 million set aside to do enforcement in the bonding bill. There wasn't a bonding bill that was acceptable to pass. This year, it's questionable whether or not we'll have another bonding bill. So again, the fees are also, we're concerned about not being able to cover our staff costs with the fees that are specified by the Board of Water and Soil Resources, like $100 a month, and then they keep going up. But as anyone knows, if you go to small claims court and you win your case, it doesn't stop there. It's whether or not you can get the money from the person you won the award against. So that is my concern there as staff. Also, as you saw with our farmer-led council, we're building trust with our agricultural community, and actually taking on the role of the enforcer of the buffer law jeopardizes that trust. And then lastly, the Scott County WMO, which has more land than we do, is choosing not to accept jurisdiction as well. So I would say that generally the watershed districts in the greater Minnesota area are taking it on because they already do enforcement. But for those watershed districts within the metro, I've heard a lot of them say they kind of like what we're saying, we don't really need to take that on. We can let the Board of Water and Soil Resources do that. So again, I'm recommending to the board that we do not accept jurisdiction. And then what would happen is, if you agree to that, then I would put a letter together and I would send it off to the Board of Water and Soil Resources saying that very thing. We're not accepting jurisdiction to do the enforcement.
Okay, so we're considering whether we want to accept or not accept jurisdiction. I'm looking for a motion.
Mr. President, I'll make a motion to accept staff recommendation number 1. I feel this is a no-brainer and was well discussed during our workshop prior to the board meeting.
So just to be clear, I think your motion is to not accept jurisdiction.
Right. To accept staff recommendation number 1, which is to not accept the jurisdiction.
I don't see number 1. I see 1, 2, 3, but there's not. I see this. This is just an explanation, I think.
Oh, I see. I see what you mean. Okay. Okay.
So
not accepting the motion to not accept jurisdiction.
Correct.
I'm sorry.
Is there a second?
I second that.
Seconded by Manager Breitbach. Is there any other questions or comments? Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. We are now moving on to the consent agenda. The consent agenda is considered as one item of business and consists of routine administrative items or items not requiring discussion. Items can be removed from the consent agenda at the request of the board member. staff member or a member of the audience, please state which item or items you wish to remove for a separate discussion. Is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
Mr. Chair, could I make a comment? Say, I apologize, members, that I'm asking you to support our contribution towards the city's phone system, but I'm not telling you how much it would cost. And
that's just what I was going to ask.
Yeah, the amount is estimated 2821. And what that would do, it would pay for all of staff's extensions. And we'd have access to all the functionality that the city would have.
Thank you for that clarification. Now we're looking for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I move that we accept the consent agenda.
Second.
Moved by Manager Breitbach, seconded by Manager Hennis. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the consent agenda passes.
Mr. Chair,
we're on to
Manager Hennis, one of the things that I'm pleased to announce to you is regardless of whether or not this phone system is supported by the City Council to make the change, we worked with the city technical person today who has Maggie on as an extension now. So when you call in, you can go to Maggie. You don't have to dial a separate number. So she's extension 5.
Just real quick, if you can clarify, Dan, I think I know the answer, but we're going to be part of their phone system, but we'll have separate numbers. We won't be integrated so that we can keep our independence with phone numbers, right?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Manager Hennis, we'll have the same phone numbers we have now.
We will?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So moving on to 6.0, the Treasurer's Report, Manager Spitzmueller.
Okay, well, I apologize, got back from Florida yesterday. I hadn't gotten a copy of Chris's, our accountant's report, so this didn't get in the packet. I sent it in about 3 or so, and I wasn't on my toes earlier. I should have made a few copies, but I will email. You have a copy, Amy, and I did get a copy in, but I'll email a copy to everybody. But briefly, the cash and investments, really the big change there is, of course, we have a significant amount of, at Northland we have $300,000 in cash, but $550,000 now is in securities. Those are set up using that CD ladder that we talked about a few months ago, so that's done. At Prior Lake, we have $551,000 in our account. That was an interesting month in that we had, in February, we had withdrawals about 80 grand, but we had deposits about $130,000. I assume we got some FEMA funding possibly during the month of February?
Mr. Chair, Manager Spitzmueller, I think that reflects the payments for the PLOC.
Okay, contributions of the other.
Right.
Okay. So we're in real good shape. Checking account is looking good these days. With respect to the Chris's report, we're about 21% spent on the district against the district budget, and overall about 17%. We just don't ever spend much on the JPMOA, but overall about 17%. So of our budget, $1,396,000, we've spent about $288,000 through February. So 21% is about right.
Okay, any questions? We will see a copy of that.
I will email all you guys a copy of that.
Okay,
Mr.
On the claims list, there's page 66 in the most recent packet. Any comments or questions?
Mr. Chair, Manager Spitzmueller, do you want me to mention something about the 2016 financial report that's in there?
Do we want to vote on the claims list first?
I'm sorry.
Do we want to vote on the claims list first?
Oh, sorry.
I'll move to accept the claims list.
All in favor, say
Yes, Mr. Chair, managers, you'll see that the financial report is listed there, and I just wanted to explain a few things. We have a number of overages that are listed on the right-hand side. And so for the, let's see here, for the monitoring and research, that 121% over our budgeted amount is primarily because of the flood study, staff work that needed to be done, and also we decided to do upper prior work. The regulation, it's up, was 153%. That's primarily staff time again for conservation easements. Education and outreach, that was up primarily because I really lowballed it. We worked a lot with our interns on the website, and we also had the MS4 audit that added to that. So if you look at the bottom line, we're at a percentage spend of 102%. So what does that mean for the alum treatment? So we had $110,000 set aside to do possibly to do a savings for the alum treatment. We did take about $16,000 or $15,000 off of that to pay Bar Engineering to do our sediment core sample and our analysis of whether or not we needed to do alum treatment in 2017. So if you take 15,000 off of that 110, you have 95,000 that we should have had set aside. We don't. We have 75,995 set aside. So it's a difference of about 20,000 that we're short on that. And that's my Yes, absolutely. So it's reflected in the capital projects amount. So we have that already in there. So yes, we have 75,995 that we haven't spent, but we've asked Chris on the financial reports going ahead to consider it spent because we don't want to spend it, but we need to know where we're at comparison to that money. So that's what we'll be showing from as we move forward.
Manager Hannes.
How much reimbursement is hanging out there from FEMA yet, or are they all caught up with us?
No, we're not caught up.
Roughly.
Let me ask Maggie. Do you have an estimate?
Is that what you mean?
Mr. Chair, managers, it's kind of hard to estimate. A lot of the projects we can't get reimbursed for until we're done. So like the sediment project, for example, until we're done with that, we can't get reimbursed for Carl's time. So there is probably like 40,000 out there that's we haven't received funds for yet. So it's substantial.
Thank you.
So this is a preliminary final year end, so there's still some numbers to move around. And I guess we talked about this a little bit, the FEMA money, when it does come, what year does it land in? 17? 18? Not 16?
No.
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if we want to, I think as far as Chris is concerned, he's published a final for 16. So I think so. I think that's his view of the world. Right, Diane?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Manager Spitzmiller, that's his idea. As Maggie indicated, it's kind of far off before we can try to get the money back from FEMA. But I would like to remind people that as we move forward on the bank erosion work, which we are working with Bar Engineering on, as we get more substantial invoices from them, we're going to go to the Department of Natural Resources for the grant money that they had set aside from the 2015 legislative session.
I guess my question was if when the FEMA money comes in, can we pay back the alum treatment fund?
That's a good question. I don't know why not. Yeah.
Because the money's spent
Right.
in this year.
Yes.
So the expense has been incurred, we just
True.
don't have the revenue. So we borrowed from, sounds like we borrowed at least some of it from the alum treatment, which we might want to repay.
Well,
Sure.
we talked about maybe establishing like a water quality, kind of segregating that money, and certainly as FEMA money comes in that is over our current planning, that, yeah, absolutely can go into that fund.
Okay. Diane, are you finished with that report?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, then I think we're at 8:24. We're moving down to 7.0, upcoming meetings. We have a CAC meeting coming Thursday, March 30th from 6:30 to 8 o'clock at Prairie Lake City Hall. All of those listening, certainly welcome to join us there if you'd like to. And we're also looking for more members of the CAA committee if people would like to get a little more involved. We have a Clean Water Cleanup Sunday, April 23rd on Sandpoint Beach, our favorite raking area. And lastly, the Spring Lake Association annual meeting will be held Sunday, April 23rd from 6 to 8 at the Wilds, and everybody is welcome to and encouraged to attend that as well. Anything more, Madam Administrator? Good. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Manager Hennis.
Second?
Second, Manager Breitbach. Everyone in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? Thank you.